Most people would never call themselves a thief, and yet many people have stolen. Not always in ways that would make the news, not in ways dramatic enough to force a confrontation, but in smaller, quieter ways that passed without much scrutiny. Keeping extra change when you knew it was a mistake. Downloading something you understood was not really free. Taking office supplies home in quantities small enough that it never quite felt like a decision. Claiming credit that was not fully yours. Using guilt to pull something out of someone emotionally that they would not have freely given. These things rarely feel like theft while they are happening. They barely feel like anything at all, but they still belong to the same moral category. Taking what is not yours, without permission, and without the intention to return it. So why do people do it? Not for one reason. Some steal because they are desperate and see no other door left open. Some steal because they want something and have decided they deserve it. Some steal out of anger, a slow accumulated resentment toward a world that appears generous to others and withholding toward them. And some steal not because they are starving or furious, but because the act has become morally weightless in their own mind. It is easy to understand desperation. There are times, especially for the poor, when the distance between hunger and theft becomes painfully small. When survival is on one side and the law is on the other, moral judgment becomes less comfortable than people like to admit. But desperation is not the only thing that matters. Why do some people feel entitled to what they take? Why do some carry such a deep resentment that even petty theft begins to feel justified? Why do small acts of stealing so often feel less like violation and more like correction? Perhaps because many people live with the feeling, sometimes conscious, often not, that something has already been taken from them. Their labour was underpaid. Their time was extracted without fair return. Their opportunities were narrower than they should have been. Their attention was harvested, their data was monetized, and their dependence was quietly turned into profit. They were told the game was fair, while watching others write the rules. This does not justify theft, but it does help explain why the line begins to blur. When people feel that value is constantly being extracted from them in legal, normalized, respectable ways, smaller acts of taking can begin to feel less like transgression and more like balance, less like theft and more like evening the score. And that is where the real question begins. In Les Misérables, a man named Jean Valjean steals a loaf of bread, not for himself, but for his sister's child who is starving. For this, he is sentenced to 5 years in prison. With failed escape attempts, that sentence stretches to 19. The man who pursues him, Inspector Javert, is not a villain in the simple sense. He is a man who believes, with complete sincerity, that the law is the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. To Javert, showing mercy to Valjean is not compassion, it is a crack in the foundation. If the law bends once, for one sympathetic reason, it becomes a thing that can always be bent. And a law that bends is no longer a law. That is what makes the story so enduring. One side looks at the act and sees a rule that was broken. The other looks at the suffering beneath the act and sees something the rule was never designed to account for. Both positions are internally coherent. Both are asking something real. And that tension between the integrity of the law and the complexity of human need has not been resolved in the 2 centuries since Hugo wrote it. It is still alive in courtrooms, in policy debates, in the quiet moments when ordinary people decide what they are and are not willing to excuse. Which brings us to the philosophers who tried to resolve it, and found they couldn't. Immanuel Kant argued that stealing cannot be morally justified, ever. His reasoning was precise and unsparing. If you act according to a rule, you are implicitly saying that rule should apply to everyone. So ask yourself, what happens if everyone steals? Ownership collapses. The very concept of property, the thing you were trying to take, disappears. the act undermines its own foundation. For Kant, this wasn't just a social argument, it was a logical one. Stealing is a contradiction built into itself, and it is hard to dismiss. The social contract does depend on a shared agreement that what belongs to you is yours. Every act of taking without consent is, in some small way, a vote against the world you want to live in. But Thomas Aquinas arrived somewhere different. He argued that in cases of genuine, urgent, life-threatening need, taking what is necessary for survival is not theft in the ordinary sense. His reasoning was that private property is a human invention, useful and worth protecting, but it exists within a natural order in which the Earth's resources were meant, first, to sustain human life. When those two things come into direct conflict, when enforcing the right to property means watching someone die beside a full table, Aquinas believed the deeper moral law took precedence. He argued that the evil person holding onto a surplus while others starve is the one violating natural law. Taking it back is simply restoring the rightful order of things. A system that protects ownership while permitting starvation, he suggested, is not a fully moral system. It is a legal one. And perhaps that's where the complication begins, because we don't live in a society guided by a moral system. We live in a legal one. There are many reasons why some people feel that a part of their rights has been taken from them, because of the ways systematic power imbalances allow wealth extraction from ordinary people. There are many things the wealthy do that don't seem fair to the ordinary person, or particularly to the poor. They use offshore accounts to hide wealth and pay less tax. They exploit loopholes like carried interests, which let fund managers pay lower tax rates than nurses. Step up in basis allows inherited wealth to erase tax liability across generations. They lobby to write the tax code in their favour. And sometimes they simply gain money through government subsidies. Then there's the corporate extractions. Wage theft is the most common form of theft in the United States, larger than all robberies combined. It includes unpaid overtime, stolen tips, misclassifying employees as contractors to deny benefits, and more. There's also widespread price fixing that keeps prices artificially high, in airlines, in housing. If you've been paying attention to the stock market, you can't help but notice there's blatant manipulation going on. High-frequency trading firms front-run ordinary investors by exploiting microsecond speed advantages. They essentially see your order before it executes and take a tiny cut. The information disadvantage is real for the ordinary person. Then there's your information and attention, being gathered and sold by social media without compensation, even if it's technically with permission, because of what you agree to. Whether people are aware of all this on a conscious level or not, a lot of people feel it subconsciously. That's why it feels okay when we steal bits here and there in normal life. Downloading or watching things illegally feels okay. Keeping some extra change feels perfectly fine. Taking some things from the office home feels justified. But just because it feels okay doesn't mean it's morally right to steal. It could be, depending on what kind of moral perspective you hold, such as Aquinas's. But it could also be morally wrong, especially if your justification is self-made. Regardless of which moral philosophy you hold, sociology does a great job at explaining why moral norms are weakened in our society. Emil Durkheim noticed that capitalism weakens shared moral norms. In a society that worships individual success and profit above all, the line between smart business and exploitation dissolves. When winning is the only value, rule-bending becomes rational. Anomie explains why corporate cultures can normalize fraud. The system's own values point that way. Similarly, the wealthy don't necessarily extract value from people because they are evil. Johann Galtung argued that social structures themselves can systematically harm people. Poverty, preventable disease, and exploitation are forms of violence, even without a perpetrator pulling a trigger. Capitalism, in this framing, doesn't need corrupt individuals. The system produces extraction as a normal output. In a society that values money as a supreme goal, it's only natural that people lean toward doing whatever they can to extract the most amount of money possible. So, where does this leave us? Is morality dead with capitalism? Yes and no. The traditional moral values get pressured and sometimes even squeezed out with capitalism. Capitalism can encourage cost-cutting over human well-being, manipulation over honesty, extraction over stewardship, and winning over fairness. Instead of asking whether something is the right or just thing to do, we are raised to think, what is this worth and what can I get in return? But as sociologist Jonathan Turner pointed out, humans have deep evolutionary wiring for fairness, reciprocity, and empathy. Capitalism can suppress or redirect these instincts, but it cannot erase them. Whistleblowers, activists, unions, mutual aid networks, these emerge inside capitalism as moral resistance. We have made significant moral progress despite being a capitalist society. The abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, civil rights, LGBTQ+ rights, environmental protections, all emerged within capitalist societies and often against the pure profit motive. This suggests that human moral agency is not simply dissolved by economic systems. In short, morality isn't dead. It's just been demoted. It is no longer the operating system of society. It is now a plug-in, an accessory. We treat morality like a luxury good, something we can afford to care about only after the profit margins are secured. Perhaps this is why we are moved by high acts of morality more than ever, because we understand the difficulty and the courage it takes for someone to step out of line and act morally instead of capitalistically. And if you made it this far, you're probably exactly the kind of person this channel is made for. Subscribe if you'd like to stay.